Okay, so welcome to the New Partner No Problem Guide, where we are going to teach you how to persuade your partner, your new partner, to run plays in a cool, non-pushy way, because nobody wants to kind of sound like a know-it-all or be annoying out there and be saying, you know, run these plays, these things are awesome, whatever. You want to be cool. You want your partner to walk away and say, hey, this guy was, or this gal, this was gal. Okay, so welcome to the New Partner No Problem Guide, where I'm going to teach you how to persuade a new partner to run plays in a cool, non-pushy way. Because nobody wants to come across as a know-it-all. Nobody wants to sound, I don't know if jerk's the right word, but just kind of annoying and you know, kind of always breathing down someone's neck and saying, hey, run these plays, run these plays. Because you want your partner to walk away from the match saying, hey, this guy was a ton of fun to play with. I want to play with him the next time, the next time I step on the court. I hope he's my partner. I'm going to tell all my buddies that this person was just great to play with, a lot of fun, and I can't wait for the next time we step on the court together. So how do we sort of get to that point? How do we strike that balance between getting someone to run a play like Bob and Mike, but you do it in a way where you aren't pushy and you're doing it in a way that's cool and your partner isn't really, annoyed or irritated when you're trying to get them to run a particular play? Well, to do that, we are going to kind of delve into persuasion and the psychology behind persuasion a little bit. And there's a very good book by a guy named Robert Cialdini. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. I wrote here, good book, highly recommend it. You can download it on Amazon onto your Kindle or your iPad if you have a Kindle app, something like that. Obviously, you can get it in paperback as well. And what Cialdini identified was 6 factors of influence. He basically said that if you're trying to persuade somebody to do anything, right, whether it's run a play or whether it's buy a new car or whether it's, I don't know, do your homework on time or something like that, there are 6 factors. There are only 6 factors you really need to touch on. And you don't have to use all of them. You can kind of identify 1 or 2 and use those as your sort of weapons of influence. But there are 6 factors. So let's run through them real quick, and then we will, in the next segment, kind of explain them in a little bit more detail and then identify the ones I think personally from a tennis perspective are the most effective. So the first is reciprocity. The second is liking. The third is authority. The fourth is scarcity. The fifth is commitment and consistency, and the 6th is social proof. So with that in mind, let's clip to the next segment, and I'll walk through these in a little bit more detail so you know exactly what each one of these factors are. So let's start with reciprocity. And reciprocity is a pretty simple principle. It basically means if I give you something, you are way more likely to do me a favor or be influenced by me than if I didn't give you something. So, for example, if I gave you this pen, I just put it in your hand and said, here's a gift, let's run a play, you're way more likely to run that play than if I had not given you this pen and I just came up to you and said, let's run this play. Now, that might sound a little bit ridiculous to you. I mean, a pen, for example, you might not even want this thing, right? So why would you be more inclined to run a play if I just put something in your hand and said this is a gift and, well, I don't even want this thing? Well, there have been studies done. Again, if we go back to that Cialdini book, really interesting study with the reciprocity angle, and he basically showed you that the person doesn't even need to want what you're giving them, but just by simply giving them something, they basically feel obligated to do you a favor, okay? So the example in the book, the one that stuck out with me was, I believe I'm pronouncing this right, it's the Hare Krishna Society. And it's basically, I don't know if it's a cult, but he might have referred to it as a cult in the book. So if you're in the Hare Krishna Society and you're not a cult, I apologize. But basically, he uses this example as this we'll say society. This society that is viewed by the rest of the population as weird. They shave their heads. I think they dress weird. So they're not, they're basically perceived as not an attractive group of folks by a lot of people in society. So Cialdini was looking at him and said, well, here we've got this group that, isn't really well liked by the rest of the society. This group's trying to raise a lot of money for their various endeavors. So how do you raise money if nobody really likes you? Well, they used reciprocity to raise money. What they did is they'd go to a public place, typically airports, and they would have something like a book, or maybe the more famous example is a flower. They would just have this, I think it was a yellow flower, I'm not sure. They'd have a flower. And passengers would be coming out of the airport, or they'd be in the airport, they're going to maybe baggage claim, something like this, and these people would come up and they would shove the flower into the passenger's hand. The passenger didn't even want it, but he just kind of took it because he's like, what's going on? And he took this flower. And the person would say, the guy in Krishna would say, well, this is our gift to you. And now would you like to make a donation? And by just putting that flower in someone's hand, the passengers were way more likely to make a donation than if they had received nothing at all. And what was interesting was these passengers would have this flower, they'd make a donation, I don't want this flower, so they'd walk over to a trash can and toss the flower in the trash can. The Krishnas would come and dig the flower out of the trash can and then just give it to the next person coming off the plane. So, I think that's a pretty good example of how, it's an interesting example, but certainly a good example of how powerful reciprocity can be. Now, liking. This one is relatively straightforward. If you like somebody, you are more inclined to agree with them, do them a favor, be persuaded by them than if you don't like them. Very obvious to a large extent, but there's some interesting ways you can use this. This is actually going to be a central thing, as we'll see in a moment with the New Partner No Problem Guide. Next one is authority. If somebody is viewed as an expert, you are going to be more likely to do what they tell you to do. So if you go to, if there's like a police officer and he says, get out of the way, this is a restricted area, you're going to do it, versus if there's some guy in a shirt that says hugs on it, you're probably not going to listen to me, but you'll listen to an officer if he's dressed like a police officer, and so on. You'll listen to a doctor. You'll listen to anybody in a position of authority when they are speaking on a topic that they are perceived to be an authority in. That's relatively straightforward, I think, as well. Scarcity. Scarcity. The less of something there is, the more people want it. So I'm not 100% sure about this. If you work for Apple and I'm wrong, you can send me an email, let me know. But when Apple releases a new product, they purposely limit the supply. My understanding is they purposely limit the supply right away so that people are, there's only, a million iPhones or something. I got to rush to the store to get my iPhone. And that's actually going to play into social proof a little bit later on. But basically scarcity, exclusivity, things like that make people want something more. So commitment and consistency. That basically means if you agree to do something, if you commit to something, you're more likely to follow through and do that particular thing. That's why people walking around with petitions, they ask you to sign the thing, because if you write your name on the piece of paper there, you're more likely to follow through than if you don't, right? That's why people try and get you to comply. Saying yes is one thing, that's a form of compliance, but if you actually take an action like writing something down, that's even more compliance, that's even more commitment and consistency, so you're more likely to follow through. And then social proof, if a bunch of other people are doing something, you are more likely to do it. And you can think about driving down a road, and you're hungry, you want to pull over and get some food. So you're driving down this road, and on the left there's a restaurant, on the right there's a restaurant. Restaurant on the left, my left, has 1 car in the parking lot. Restaurant on the right has 10 cars in the parking lot. Which one are you going to go to? You're going to go to the one on the right with more cars in the parking lot. Social proof. If we come back to the scarcity thing, Apple limits the amount of their new product, so people want it because it's exclusive, there's not much of it. But what also happens is you get a long line out the Apple Store in New York City with people waiting in line to get this product. So then you have all these news crews that are filming all these people lined up to buy this new Apple product. That's a ton of social proof. Everybody at home watching who isn't a voracious Apple fan, doesn't want to, camp out at night to get a product, well, they see everybody's, they see all these people out there and they say, well, you know what? maybe these people know something. Maybe I'm going to get myself a new iPhone or a new iPad or something like that. So social proof, very powerful one as well. So now now that we have an understanding of how all this stuff operates, let's drill down into the specific ones I think are most applicable when we're talking about doubles and when we're talking about running plays. Okay, so in my view, reciprocity, liking, and authority are the most, I guess, relevant factors we want to touch on when we're talking about convincing our partners to run plays. I think scarcity, for example, it's difficult to sort of apply that. Like, what would you do to limit something to get somebody to run a play? It didn't really seem like it would work too well. Social proof, you certainly could say, well, everybody's doing it, we should do it too. That actually could work if you could figure out a way to kind of work it into a conversation. But I don't think, as a general rule, you'd be able to, something repeatable, you could get that in there. And then commitment and consistency. We actually could come back to that a little bit later on. That might be useful if you can get somebody to say, oh, well, yeah, I'll try it once or something like that. Then they might be more inclined to do it during a match. But I think that one's a little tough to work in as well. I think these three are the ones you can kind of keep coming back to over and over and over and have sort of a repeatable process you can work through when trying to convince a new partner to run a play. Now, with reciprocity, again, that's sort of just like doing someone a favor, right? So anytime you can, with a new partner or maybe your club team or something like that, if you can just do a small favor, then that, but obviously before the match, and it doesn't have to be right before the match. It can actually, studies have shown you can do it a day or two or more, ahead of a match. It doesn't have to be right before. But just favors, small favors, are going to help you when you ask your partner, hey, let's try out this play, or let's do this, or something like that. So, what could a favor be? It could be something like getting somebody a Gatorade. It could be getting somebody a towel. I'm sure you can think of a bunch of ways you can do somebody a favor at your particular club, and that's probably the best approach to take, is sort of just, well, these are the dynamics of my club. These are my teammates. What maybe favor could I do here or there? But it doesn't have to be a big favor. Remember, that flower, putting the flower in someone's hand got people to comply with a request. So just a small little favor is going to help you influence your new partner to run some plays. Yeah, so I set that up there. Yeah, it doesn't have to be right before a match. That's important. Don't feel like, oh, we're about to start playing, here's a Gatorade. You can certainly do that, but you can actually, if you know you're going to play a match with somebody tomorrow, you can do them a favor the day before. I can't remember exactly from that book and other studies sort of when the reciprocity wears off, so to speak, but I believe it could be, depending on the scale of the favor, it could last months or years. And I'm sure you can think of examples from your life where somebody's done you a favor a long time ago, maybe a big favor, and you still feel obligated to them. So, yeah, reciprocity, you certainly can look to your own life and see that particular factor in action. So the big one for me is liking, and this is where we're really going to spend a lot of our time and a lot of our focus, because, again, while it's not, no one's going to be shocked, like I said earlier, like, oh, if I like somebody, I'm way more likely to comply with a request they make. Well, sure, of course you are, but I think, how do you develop liking? It's more natural for some people than others. So we're just going to kind of break it down into something that's relatively simple to reproduce on a tennis court. So liking, really big parts of it. The psychologists use a bunch of big words. I'm just going to lump them all together because I'm not a psychologist, and you can kind of pick which one you like the best. Connection, rapport, like do you have rapport with somebody? It's kind of like connection, and affinity, and that's sort of like, affinity is, are you like somebody? Because you tend to like people if you tend to like somebody more if that person is like you. So basically the broad point we're trying to get at here is, when we're talking about liking, we're trying to figure out, how is my doubles partner, how is my new partner like me in some way? Or the other way to think about it is, how am I like my doubles partner? So if we're playing and I'm the new partner, you want to figure out, how am I like you, and you want me to say to myself during the course of our conversation, hey, you're kind of, I'm kind of like this partner here. I like this guy. We've got this connection here. We've got something in common is basically what I'm getting at. What do you guys have in common? Now, this you very much want to establish basically as early as possible, as soon as possible, before the match starts. Just via some, conversation. It doesn't have to be super complicated conversation. You can be like, hey, what's going on? Obviously, the club, if you guys are part of the same club, that's a point of connection. But really, what I said here, what does your partner have in common? I've written up here, hopefully you can read it, the more niche, the better. So the club might be a common point of connection, but everybody on the court there is going to have that point of connection. So that's not going to be as powerful as something more niche, niche, however you want to pronounce it, something a little bit more drilled down that, well, let me just give you an example of how that works. So I'm a Washington Redskins fan. I'm here in Washington, D.C. Everybody here is a Washington Redskins fan. So while we certainly have that all in common, because it's so common, it's not going to develop, I'm not going to have the same rapport or connection with somebody here as I would if I went to if I went to Dallas, Texas, then I found another Redskins fan, we're in enemy territory there because Cowboys are rivals. So if I'm in Dallas, Texas, and I find another Redskins fan, our connection is going to be deeper because there's not too many Redskins fans down there. So even though we have, Redskins fan in D.C., Redskins fan in Dallas, Texas, the context that surrounds it is very, very important. So the Skins is one example. When I was in Melbourne, Australia, well, actually take a step back. I have a very good friend who is getting married in Stavanger, Norway. She works here in D.C., but her future husband is from Stavanger. She's actually from Stavanger as well. They're both Norwegian, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, I'm going to Stavanger this summer, very excited about it. So I'm down in Melbourne for the Aussie Open, and I meet this person and and I find out this person is from Norway as well. And I'm like, well, I'm going to Stavanger to go to this wedding. And this person was like, I'm from Stavanger. That's unbelievable. She asked me, are you making this up? And I was like, no, I'm going to Stavanger for a friend's wedding. But it was so random to be in Melbourne and bring up a conversation about Stavanger and have the person you're talking to be from Stavanger. So we immediately had a connection, rapport, affinity, whatever you want to call it, because of that random sort of conversation piece. So that's what you want to look for when you are chatting with your new partner. If you've never met them before, you want to, kind of as quickly as possible, figure out what's the most niche sort of thing we have in common. That's going to develop connection, rapport, affinity faster than talking about your club or the fact that you're all Redskins fans, but you're in, Washington, D.C., something like that. Now, if you listen to, I want to give you an example of the Bros doing this. It was a very, very subtle comment that Bob and Mike made. The question was something in the effect of how do you play with, it was basically a new partner question. When you play mixed doubles, how do you kind of develop a connection with your new partner? I think the question specifically is what do you guys talk about on changeovers? And Bob and Mike said, well, we just kind of talk about, what restaurants we're going to. Now, on the face of it, that seems like a very kind of weird, arguably kind of dumb comment. What restaurants do you go to? Like, okay, that doesn't seem very niche to me. That just seems weird. Well, remember, these guys are professional tennis players. Well, we all knew they were professional tennis players, but more specifically, they are traveling all the time. They're in a new city every single week, basically. So the conversation about restaurants is actually, from a tennis player's perspective, pretty niche and pretty, unique to what those guys are doing. I mean, you're in a new city every week. Well, shoot, what are the good restaurants to go to? Where should I go eat? So that's actually a very it's the sneaky rapport I built in here, because it's something that'll really lead to a lot of connection and resonance with a tennis player, but also on the outside where we're always in the same city all the time talking about restaurants, that's kind of dumb. Like why would you talk about that on a changeover? So I thought that was a really, really subtle thing that I found quite interesting, and I thought it was it was an indication that Bob and Mike do this stuff. I mean, they're building rapport, they're building a connection in the case of mixed doubles so that they can play more effectively, and they can be on the same page, they can have better teamwork during the course of a match. Now, the final one is authority. And there was actually another question from the live calls where, as well, if I'm trying to get somebody on the same page, what are some things I can do? And Bob and Mike kind of jokingly said, well, tell them that the Bryan brothers do it. And that's basically an example of borrowed authority. So that's really what we want when we're talking about authority here. You want to borrow authority. You don't want to position yourself as the authority because, when you're playing a doubles match and a league match, you guys are peers. You don't want to have this, a disproportionate kind of balance there in terms of who's more knowledgeable or something, or you don't want to come off as trying to be the authority. So this one's a little bit tricky. When you talk about authority, you want to have it borrowed. You want to say, well, Coach so-and-so at the club said this would be effective. Hey, you want to try this? Or, I saw the Bryan Bros doing this. You want to try it. The Bryan Bros, apparently this work, you want to translate. The Bryan Bros do this. This apparently is going to work great for us. So why don't we try that? So again, you don't want to come off sounding like the expert because that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You don't want to come off as sounding pushy. You don't want to come off as sounding like a know-it-all. So very much want to have the borrowed authority, refer to another authority to kind of bolster your argument about running plays.